This is a Sega Mega Drive, and its music was incredible. As a child of the 90s, I was reared on a wholesome diet of 16-bit goodness. I'll never forget the moment some 30 years ago when my mother collected me from school, took me to the boot of the car, and opened it to reveal the second-hand Model 1 Sega Mega Drive that she had purchased for me. The nth era of 8-bit gaming was over. A new age was upon us. Well, upon me. This was a great time for gaming, and it was a wonderful time to be a gamer, even a very young one. And I will always be happy to have experienced the 16-bit generation when it was current. It goes without saying, but while powerful for their time, the 16-bit consoles, such as the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, had severe limitations compared to the consoles of today. Whether it was the raw processing power or even the amount of data that could fit onto a cartridge, there were constraints and limits everywhere, and those limits were orders of magnitude greater than they are today. And this was true for perhaps nothing more than the music. The sound of the 16-bit era is legendary. In part, due to the aforementioned technological constraints of the hardware, developers and composers were forced by necessity to deploy extraordinary creativity in order to manifest the incredible experiences that have stuck with us. To put this in perspective, Sonic 2 shipped on a 1 megabyte cartridge, meaning the entirety of the game, everything in it, levels, characters, sounds and music, all had to fit into 1 megabyte or less. Later on, there were games that were larger than this, some as big as 4 megabytes, but most were between 500 kilobytes and 3.5 megabytes. This meant that including music files on the cartridge would have been impossible. So rather than, as we have been accustomed to since the advent of optical media, including CD quality or greater music files in games, the consoles had programmable sound hardware, meaning that composers and developers, instead of creating the music, exporting it as a sound file, and putting that file into the game, they created sequences of code, which were of course far smaller in file size than even a heavily compressed MP3. This code then told the sound chip what sounds to play, and then told them how to play them and when to play them on the fly. And the chip created the music in real time from this code as you were playing the game. It was an ingenious way of creating extraordinary aural experiences within the extreme hardware limitations of the day. The Mega Drive contained 2 sound processors. The main one was the Yamaha YM2612, and this was paired with the Texas Instruments SN76489. The 2612 creates sound via frequency modulation, or FM synthesis, meaning that it generates waveforms, or tones, and then modulates these waveforms with other waveforms, meaning that the different tones mix together, affect each other, and create sounds. Each of these 6 voices are then used to play notes or beats and are combined together in an infinite number of ways in order to create music. This contrasts the Texas Instruments chip, which is a PSG, or Programmable Sound Generator, and is essentially the sound chip found in the Master System, and weirdly, the ColecoVision, which is bizarre. Unlike the complex FM synthesis of the Yamaha chip, the SN processor generated simple square waves, and this added contrast and depth. And as you can probably tell from this alone, creating music on Sega's 16-bit machine was very complicated. Working with an FM sound module required extensive programming and technical knowledge, alongside being able to create the actual composition and arrangement itself. Let's compare this to the sound technology found inside the Super Nintendo, the main competitor of the Mega Drive back in the day. The SNES contains the Sony sample-based sound processor, meaning that rather than having to program and manipulate FM operators, as we've just shown, in order to create sounds, programmers and composers simply loaded samples of the sounds they wanted into the 64 kilobytes of memory on board the SPC 700. A sample is a tiny audio clip, usually of an instrument, often a single note or beat. Once these little clips or samples were loaded in, the game would then tell the SPC 700 how and when to trigger them. And whereas the chip in the Mega Drive had 6 channels of audio, the SNES featured 8 channels. Et voila, we have music on the Super Nintendo. Now, fundamentally, the technology of the SPC 700 isn't better or worse than the YM2612 per se, but it is much simpler to work with and has always been far more accessible for developers, and it goes a long way to explaining why the floor for music on the Super Nintendo was so much higher than it was for the Mega Drive. The sample-based nature of SNES music meant that it was straightforward to create something that at least sounded relatively pleasant, regardless of how good or bad the composition and arrangement was. Whereas the complex nature of FM synthesis on the Mega Drive meant that when it sounded bad, it sounded really, really bad. But this complexity had upsides. The SNES excelled at producing rich, symphonic music that sounded, for the time at least, very much like it was being performed by real instruments. And this led to an incredible library of music. Whereas the YM2612 was generating its sounds in real time, and the Mega Drive was, therefore, capable of very dynamic and evolving music and sound when in the hands of someone that knew what they were doing. This is a long-winded way of me saying that both the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo had very distinct personalities, very different flavors. But the 16-bit machines from Sega and Nintendo both remain extraordinary consoles to this day, with libraries of games for the ages, and both have some of the most outstanding music in gaming history. Aside from some great times gaming at a friend's house, my 16-bit journey began on that faithful day some 30 years ago when I saw the Mega Drive in the boot. We subsequently got home, set the Mega Drive up, and my mother handed me a game that would stay with me forever. Sonic 2 is 16-bit perfection in practically every single way. The original Sonic the Hedgehog was a good game with some extraordinary music, but its sequel trimmed away the fat and perfected the formula by reducing each zone to 2 acts, tidying up the gameplay, refining the graphics, and most importantly, delivering one of the greatest video game soundtracks in the history of the medium. Sega created a masterpiece. Having gone from my beloved Sonic the Hedgehog on the Master System, which was an outstanding game with a great soundtrack in its own right, to this, the outstanding intro and start menu that has always felt so monumental in Sonic games was here. But it was after pressing start that we learn Sonic Team was not playing around. Emerald Hill still has that strong emotional impact that I associate with playing the Mega Drive for the first time. From then on, we are treated to an unbelievable suite of unforgettable music. Simply put, this was FM synthesis at its best. And while I wasn't conscious of the technology or aware of it at the time, it just made me feel good. And Sonic as a series contains a truly mind-bending quantity of genre-defining music. Way too much to cover. But fundamentally, the music in the 16-bit Sonic games was conceived and created with the FM technology in mind. Whilst it was possible to recreate roughly real instruments, and sometimes to a pretty pleasing extent, Mega Drive music was at its best, in my view, when creators embraced the FM technology, the nature of the synthesized sounds, and built the music based upon that. So while the Mega Drive could never have produced anything like, say, Final Fantasy III or VI, it could produce both consoles' sound and music have such distinctive and interesting personalities. Sega's 16-bit machine was at its best when developers conceived and created Mega Drive games. Art direction that looked outstanding using the Mega Drive's color palette, with character and level design that go hand in hand with the type of music that the YM2612 excelled in facilitating the creation of. God damn, some games really, really nailed it. But as I have already mentioned, the reputation for poor sound and music did not come from nowhere. And alongside the plethora of incredible musical experiences to come out of Japan, when many Western developers started creating games for the platform, the difficulties of developing for the Yamaha chip quickly became evident. As you can hear, this is not good. Fundamentally, those creating these games, and specifically the music, did not have the expertise to work with FM synthesis and did not know how to extract all of its creative potential. Sega's software tools had a reputation for being subpar, something that would haunt them into future generations as well. And this meant that developers had to invest significant time and effort into understanding the technology available to them in order to even begin grasping its creative potential. Many of Sega's arcade machines at the time had used Yamaha FM chips, and there was, therefore, a significant amount of expertise within the Japanese game development studios. But this was just not the case for many Western developers. Sega of America did cotton onto this and reached out to recreational brainware to develop a solution. GEMS, or Genesis Editor for Music and Sound Effects, offered a user-friendly music creation environment for Mega Drive game development, of course Genesis being the name for the Mega Drive in North America. This software was a go-between for developers to interface with the YM2612 and made it possible for many of them to create music for the Mega Drive that otherwise would not have been able to do so. And while GEMS has a well-earned reputation for having been the software used to create some truly appalling video game sound and music, this reputation cannot be laid solely at its feet, as some fantastic music was also created with GEMS. And we thus end up in the same place. Fundamentally, creating great music on Sega's 16-bit machine was very, very difficult. and even additional sound drivers could not overcome this. And this is compounded further when compared to the beautiful, easy to understand Sony SPC 700 in the Super Nintendo. It's very, very easy to see how this reputation came about. But, and there is a big but, as hinted at before, this complexity also gave unparalleled creative potential to those that were able to wrap their heads around it and ultimately master the technology. As well as the games whose developers clearly struggled with the issues we've just explained, the Mega Drive was home to some of the most extraordinary and moving music in the history of our beloved medium, with composers and developers creating magisterial experiences that one might have thought simply impossible with the technology. I mean, just take a look at this. Look at those parallax layers, the art direction. Thunder Force 4 is a magnificent game designed to maximize the potential of the Mega Drive, and it is taken to the next level by this absolutely heart-pounding music. Konami did eventually deliver an outstanding Castlevania title for the Mega Drive, with pioneering composer Michiru Yamane at the helm. Tasked with building on the series' musical legacy, she faced immense pressure but exceeded expectations. With a strong background in Baroque and classical music, combined with her study of FM synthesis and programming, Yamane was perfectly suited to the job. From beautifully designed FM instruments to pitch-perfect compositions and arrangements, it has incredible music. Even some games that had versions on both the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo could end up sounding fantastic on the former. Take Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist. While clearly inferior to the Super Nintendo version in terms of graphics, in my opinion, the music in Hyperstone Heist was outstanding. First, take a listen to the SNES version of Turtle Swing. Now, if you listen closely, you can hear the static, staccato nature of the sample-based playback. When one sample ends, it cuts off, and then the sample is re-triggered at a different pitch, and this carries on, and we get the music. But compare this to the Mega Drive version, with the sounds being generated in real time via FM synthesis. Now, I'm not here to say one is better or worse. Both sound magnificent, but both have distinctive flavors. The original arcade game used a Yamaha FM chip, making the Mega Drive a great platform for the music in this home conversion. And for me, this is a perfect example of the kind of music that sparkles with the Yamaha chip. There are other games that produce music that sounds really like it should not have been possible on the technology. Take Gauntlet 4. And then, every so often, in a sea of greatness, a generational talent will emerge. In 1993, Electronic Games magazine noted that Yuzo Koshiro was almost universally acknowledged as the most gifted composer working in video games at the time. Having the gift is one thing, but Koshiro-san's greatness stems from his work and how he deployed those gifts. When considering the creative potential of the Yamaha YM2612 and the emotional experiences it is capable of imparting onto the gamer, he transcended this potential, and he defined his own 16-bit musical and emotional world for us to experience. And when he was part of a team that were united in their pursuit of excellence, the result was genre-defining. The music of Streets of Rage is legendary, and only 1 year later, having refined his knowledge and understanding of the FM synthesis in the Mega Drive, he created the platform-defining soundtrack for Streets of Rage 2. And as for Streets of Rage 2, we see what is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of Mega Drive game development. Everything about it was pitch perfect for the platform. The visual design, with the gritty streets and varied levels, had excellent use of color and made optimal use of the limited palette that the Mega Drive had. The much larger sprites made the game feel more immersive and fun, and of course, the music topped off this package to create what was a near perfect game. Yuzo Koshiro showed us what the Mega Drive was and is capable of, and fundamentally, he's the ultimate example of why music on the Mega Drive was so great. The reason music and sound on the Mega Drive was amazing was because of the incredible creators, developers, and musicians that worked and worked and worked in order to realize their creative vision. That is why we care about the music of the Sega Mega Drive. And even today, this legend is pushing the boundaries of this technology with his upcoming game, Eartheon, and it looks like it might just be the most extraordinary Mega Drive game ever created, truly showing what the system is capable of with modern development tools and without cartridge size limitations. Now, there are a few people that I would quickly like to thank. The first is Sega Lord X, whose passion, expertise, and hard work in creating videos helped inform me and relight my passion for the Mega Drive era of gaming, and of course, the music. John Lindemann from Digital Foundry is just about as passionate of a Sega fan as exists on YouTube. His insight and love for this era of gaming, along with his top-tier video production quality, also contributed to my want and desire to create YouTube videos in general, but especially this video. And finally, I have to thank Engelbart, whose ridiculously deep understanding of music creation on the Mega Drive combined with his generosity and the work he put into creating the extraordinary Death the Mask tutorial series on YouTube, it massively deepened my understanding and appreciation for Mega Drive music creation, and if anything, made me capable of enjoying it even more than I already did. So thank you, Engelbart. And fundamentally, this is why I love making these videos. I love learning about something that I care deeply about from other experts and people that have passion for it. But with that, I would like to say thank you very, 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 very much for watching. I really appreciate you so much. I hope you're having a fantastic day. If you did enjoy the video, please consider clicking the like button down below. And if you'd like to see other videos on cool, awesome stuff, consider clicking the subscribe button. I hope to see you next time, but for now, goodbye.